What if the guy famous for his unbelievable crashes wasn't just a stuntman, but one of the most brilliant brand strategists of the 20th century? We're not just going to look at the stunts today, we're going to decode the system behind them. This is the story of how one man turned catastrophic failure into a global empire.
So it's 1967. Evel Knievel is at Caesar's palace, staring down this monumental jump. He's got no money, no official approval, but he's got this pre-written article in his pocket. He's literally ready to bluff his way onto the world stage. I mean, let's just pause on that for a second, because this moment, this is the whole ballgame. He's a nobody at this point, just an outsider with a bike and a completely insane idea. He can't get permission, so he just creates his own reality. He starts calling news outlets, pretending to be different people, all hyping up this amazing stuntman. He basically manufactured a media frenzy from thin air. This was never just about a jump, it was a bet, where the chips were his own life and the prize was the world's attention.
And this right here is the single most important idea we are going to talk about. Get this, the crash was the product. Let me say that again. The crash was the product, not the perfect landing, not the flawless execution. The violent, bone-shattering, almost fatal failure, that was what he was selling. And it's so completely backward from everything we're taught about success, right? Which is exactly why it was pure genius. He wasn't selling perfection, he was selling the raw, unfiltered drama of a guy surviving the absolute worst-case scenario.
So that brings us to the big question, doesn't it? How on earth did a man famous for failing build a global empire? How did every broken bone, every hospital stay, every single miscalculation somehow make him richer and more famous? It sounds like a total paradox, but it wasn't luck. Oh no, it was a system, a repeatable, calculated, and frankly, brilliant strategy.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this whole thing down. First, we'll dig into the spectacular failure that kicked it all off. Then we'll see how he landed on the idea that attention equals currency. After that, we'll define the Knievel Protocol itself. Then we'll see how he put it into action by systematizing the spectacle. We'll look at the blueprint for an icon to understand his legacy. And finally, we'll wrap up with the mastery of risk, the lessons you can actually use.
Okay, Section 1, the spectacular failure. This is where it all started. And we have to stop thinking about the Caesar's Palace jump as a tragic accident. You have to see it for what it really was, the single best business decision of his entire life. This was the birth of his whole philosophy.
So check out how this all went down. It starts with the pre-jump bluff. He corners the CEO of Caesar's Palace and basically convinces him with nothing but pure swagger that the world's media is already on its way. Total lie, but it worked. Then there's the jump itself. He tries to clear these 141-foot fountains. And he does, kinda. He clears the distance, but the landing is an absolute catastrophe. And that leads to the crash. It's brutal. He tumbles, the bike crushes him, he breaks dozens of bones, ends up in a coma for 29 days. But here's the kicker, the aftermath. The footage of that crash was everywhere. It was horrifying, and you just couldn't look away. In that one moment of total failure, Evel Knievel became a household name. Not as the guy who made the jump, but as the guy who survived the crash.
And this is the light bulb moment he had while he was recovering. The public didn't really give a damn if he stuck the landing. You know, perfection is fine, but it's kinda sterile. It doesn't grab you by the throat. What people were hooked on was the raw, uncut drama of a human being putting it all on the line. They were buying a front row seat to a fight between a man and his own mortality. And when he lost that fight but somehow lived to tell the tale, that's when he became a legend. He was the anti-hero who stood for one thing: resilience.
So you gotta ask, where does an idea like that even come from? It wasn't born in that hospital bed. Now, to get that, we have to go back to his early days. Section 2, attention equals currency. See, Knievel wasn't born a daredevil. He was forged as a hustler, a salesman. And that's where he got the core insight that powered his entire career.
Before any of the jumps, this guy sold insurance. And he was so aggressive that he supposedly set a state record for policies sold in a week. He started a hockey team where he was the owner, the player, and the promoter. He even got in a fight once just to get the team's name in the paper. The guy was a professional hustler, through and through. And what he learned from all this was that the boring stuff, the paperwork, the quiet details, that just wasn't him. His one true bankable asset was his own loud, aggressive, risk-taking personality. He realized pretty quick he wasn't selling insurance or hockey tickets. He was selling himself. He was the product.
And this right here is what's so amazing. It just lays it all out. On the left, you've got conventional success. That's what they teach us in school, right?
Aim for perfection, play it safe, and whatever you do, do not fail. Now look at Knievel's model. He just flipped the whole script. He ran towards the spectacle, he embraced risk, and, this is the most important part, he didn't just accept failure, he used it. He understood that his biggest potential weakness, failing in front of the whole world, was actually his greatest strength.
And it all boils down to this one simple, powerful truth that he really figured out after Caesar's palace. Attention equals currency. He understood that in our world, the most valuable thing isn't gold, it's eyeballs. It's the focused attention of the public. And he had found the ultimate cheat code to get an endless supply of it, taking huge, spectacular risks. The more people that were watching, the more power he had. Everything else was just noise.
Okay, so this brings us to the heart of it all. Section 3, the Knievel Protocol. This wasn't just some reckless impulse. He took all those hard-won lessons and engineered them into a repeatable philosophy, a real strategy for building a brand on the idea of risk.
So let's define it. The Knievel Protocol is the belief that your own personal risk is a non-fungible asset. Think of it like a one-of-a-kind painting. It's unique. Nobody else could offer the authentic, real risk that he was putting on the table. And he knew you could only cash in on that asset at a very specific point, where real, life-or-death stakes meet a super dramatic, almost Hollywood-style presentation. It had to feel real, and it had to look incredible.
And his whole strategy was built on these 3 big ideas. First, the Anti-Perfectionism Stance. This is the core belief. A survived crash is just better for business than a boring, safe landing. Drama sells. Second, attention arbitrage. And that famous white jumpsuit? Pure genius. That wasn't just for style, it was a business decision, designed to pop against the dark asphalt and the sky, making him an unmissable target for every camera. And third, the self-determination mandate. Knievel owned the whole show. He bet his own life, his own reputation, never a sponsor's. That total ownership meant the brand, the risk, and all the reward were his and his alone.
But look, a philosophy is great, but how do you actually do it day in and day out? Well, that brings us to Section 4, systematizing the spectacle. This is how he turned his ideas into a routine that reliably converted risk into a mountain of free media attention.
He basically ran his career on 2 engines, working at the same time. On one hand, you had the media engine. Before any jump, he'd go into hype mode. He'd tell reporters a jump was over 18 cars when it was really 15, because he knew the spectacle mattered more than the details. On the other hand, you had his physical engine. This was his system for dealing with the aftermath. He'd literally invite cameras into his hospital room, turning his recovery into the next chapter of the story. He created this perfect loop: injury, recovery, dramatic return. It became part of the legend.
433. That's the number of bones Evel Knievel reportedly broke in his career. Just let that sink in. I mean, wow. But that number wasn't a sign that he was reckless, it was proof his system worked. Every single one of those fractures was another public test of his physical engine. His real talent wasn't landing the jump, it was his ruthless focus on recovering and getting back on the bike, which just kept reinforcing the story of the man who could not be broken.
So when you really get it, you realize the jump, those few seconds in the air, it was never the main event. It was just the big, flashy climax to a marketing campaign that had been running for months. The real work happened in press conferences, in interviews, even in the hospital bed. The jump was just the exclamation point at the end of a very, very carefully written sentence.
Okay, so let's zoom out. What did all this add up to? Section 5, Blueprint for an Icon. This is where we see how his systems didn't just transform a man, they kind of transformed our whole culture's view on risk and branding.
I mean, it's a crazy transformation when you look at it. In the 60s, he's just this local hustler trying to get noticed. But by the 70s, after Caesars and all the other jumps and crashes, he's a global icon. His name became shorthand for audacity and defiance. And his real legacy? He literally wrote the playbook on using personal risk to get attention. He basically invented the category. And that's his lasting proof, right there. He showed the world that spectacular failure, as long as you present it with drama and you bounce back from it, can be way more memorable and even more profitable than a whole lifetime of playing it safe. He gave people a blueprint for turning their biggest fear into their most powerful branding tool.
So what does all this mean for us? People who probably aren't jumping motorcycles over canyons. Let's boil it all down in our last section, the mastery of risk. These are the lessons from his playbook that apply to just about anyone.
So here it is, the Knievel Protocol for the rest of us. First, focus on presentation and resilience.
It's not just about the work, it's about how you frame the work and how you bounce back when things go wrong. Second, adopt the anti-perfectionism stance. Ask yourself this: what if your next crash, your next failed project, is actually the most valuable marketing story you could ever have? Third, reframe failure. Stop seeing it as the end. See it as a plot twist, another chapter in your story. And finally, bet on your own vision. Just like he did, you have to own your own narrative, completely and totally.
So in the end, we have to remember, Evel Knievel built his entire legend on one hard truth. The crash was the product. His Knievel Protocol gave us all a blueprint for turning risk into a branding strategy, all through spectacular drama and just an unbelievable amount of resilience. And it teaches us a rule that applies to anything worth doing. The legend is not built on safety, it is built on the systematic mastery of the spectacular.